A legislative committee has voted to advance a measure that would establish the Office of New Americans within Maine state government. The measure was passed by the State and Local Government Committee yesterday. The bill would create a two-person office operated within the Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future. The office would be tasked with improving the economic and civic integration of immigrants into the state's workforce, enhancing the vibrancy of Maine's communities, and building a strong and inclusive economy. An advisory council made up of individuals and organizations representing immigrant communities would oversee the office. The bill faces further votes in the House and Senate in the coming weeks.